All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at moral development,
Values.
values, and religion.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. This is going to be a long one, so buckle up. Basically, we're exploring the evolution of how we figure out right and wrong, what we treasure, and how our spiritual lives play into all of that as we grow up. As you're going through senior year and you're thinking ahead to college, to work,
It's
all the,
decisions. Decisions.
right, what helps you make those tough choices.
Totally.
Well, for this deep dive, we've got a ton of fascinating research theories from some of psychology's heavy hitters, really trying to unpack these big questions.
Yeah. We're talking Pied,
Kohlberg,
Gilligan.
the whole gang's here.
All the big names. We're diving deep into how that internal compass of yours develops, the things that matter most to you, and how you see religion and spirituality might change as you head into adulthood. And it's a huge topic, but that's what we're here for. Our mission today is to distill those key insights, give you a clear picture of these complex areas without getting bogged down. Nobody wants a lecture.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
So let's start with moral development, the basics. How do we even define this thing?
At its core, moral development is all about how your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors change as you grapple with what's right and wrong. And, it's not just about your own beliefs, that internal part. It's also about how you navigate those gray areas with other people, the social dimension. To wrap their heads around it, researchers typically explore 5 big questions. How do we reason through moral dilemmas, like those tricky situations? How do we actually act when faced with a moral choice? Because sometimes our thoughts and actions don't quite line up, right? What role do emotions play in our moral lives? Because it's not always just logic. What makes up our individual moral character, those qualities that define us? And how do we differentiate between truly moral issues versus social rules, those things everyone's expected to follow, and then just personal preferences, which are totally up to you.
And that gives us a good framework. So let's tackle that first question. How our moral thinking develops. Piaget, he's got to be our starting point.
Yeah, but Piaget's like the OG Jean Piaget. Just by watching kids play and asking them about rule breaking, he came up with this idea that there are 2 main stages in how kids think about morality.
Interesting.
First up, we have heteronymous morality. This usually kicks in around age 4 and lasts till about 7. So think of a little kid, right? Totally convinced that the rules of a game are like etched in stone, unchangeable, part of the universe, like gravity or something.
Right.
That's how they see moral rules too. And they judge whether something's bad based solely on the outcome, not on what the person intended to do. Like, imagine a kid accidentally knocks over a whole stack of plates.
Oh, disaster.
Versus another kid who maybe breaks just one plate but on purpose. To them, that accidental stack smashing is way worse because the consequences are bigger.
Makes sense from their perspective.
Right. They also believe in this thing called imminent justice. That's the idea that if you do something wrong, bam, punishment's going to find you no matter what, even if nobody saw you do it. It's like the universe has eyes.
Yeah, I remember feeling that way, like if I snuck an extra cookie before dinner.
Exactly, that lurking sense of impending doom.
Totally.
Now, around age 10 and older, they transition into autonomous morality. That's when they realize, hold on, rules are made by people and they can be changed by people.
That's a big shift.
Huge. And now when they're judging actions, they take intentions into account, not just the outcome. So they're understanding the why behind the what. Rules become more like agreements, helpful for society, but not absolute. And they get that punishment, Consequences only happen if someone actually saw you do something wrong and decides to do something about it.
Yeah.
Of course, there's this transition period between these 2 stages, somewhere between 7 and 10, where kids show a bit of both.
So that 5-year-old, deep in that heteronymous stage, according to Piaget's thinking, they're probably also in the pre-operational stage of cognitive development, right? Where it's all about their own viewpoint.
You got it. That limited ability to see things from another person's perspective definitely lines up with the whole rules are set in stone thing. It's all very external, black and white. However, there's been some pushback on this. Ross Thompson, along with other researchers, argue that even little kids might be more aware of what others are thinking and feeling than Piaget initially gave them credit for.
Really?
Yeah, for instance, there's this study where 3-year-olds were less likely to help someone who they'd just seen being mean to another person. So that suggests some understanding of intention, right, and morality, even at that young age.
That's fascinating. So Piaget laid the groundwork. Then came Kohlberg, who took this idea of moral reasoning to another level, right? He was all about those tough moral dilemmas.
He was. Lawrence Kohlberg. He loved a good hypothetical moral crisis. You know, those thought experiments that force you to choose between two difficult options. The Heinz dilemma is probably his most famous one. A man needs to steal a life-saving drug for his dying wife, but it's illegal.
Right, right.
Kohlberg wasn't so much interested in whether people said they would steal or not. He was fascinated by their reasoning. Why did they think it was the right or wrong thing to do? And based on their explanations, he came up with 3 levels of moral reasoning, each with 2 stages.
Okay, so remind us about those 3 levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional.
All right. Level 1, pre-conventional reasoning. This is our starting point, the most basic. Here, moral decisions are driven by self-interest. You're thinking about rewards and punishments. It's all about what's in it for me.
Avoid the bad, get the good.
Exactly. So a kid at this level might follow the rules simply because they don't want to get grounded, or on the flip side, because they want a treat. It's all very external. Now, level 2, conventional reasoning. This is where things get a bit more complex. At this stage, you start thinking about your role in society, about expectations, about being a good person in the eyes of others. You follow the rules because you want to be seen as good or because you understand that rules maintain order.
It's about fitting in, doing your duty.
Exactly. Playing by the rules of the game. And finally, level 3, post-conventional reasoning. This is the most advanced level, the top tier. Here, you develop your own set of moral principles, those deeply held beliefs that go beyond just laws and social norms. You recognize that there can be different perspectives on what's right and wrong, and you make decisions based on these internalized ethical standards, even if they clash with the law.
Doing what you believe is right, even if it means going against the grain.
Precisely. Kohlberg believed that we typically move through these levels in a sequence, as we get older. So most little kids are pre-conventional, then they shift to conventional thinking in early adolescence, and then a smaller group, they reach that post-conventional level by early adulthood. And his research showed that generally people use less of that level 1 reasoning as they mature.
It's like we become less self-centered and more aware of the bigger picture.
Exactly. But Kohlberg, he stressed that just getting older isn't a guarantee you'll move up these levels. He believed actively wrestling with moral questions, those ethical dilemmas, is what pushes us forward. And just like Piaget, he saw peer interaction as being super important for this. Because, when you hang out with your friends, you're constantly negotiating, debating, considering different viewpoints.
We're bouncing ideas off each other.
Right. And there's even research that shows that engaging in discussions where the arguments presented are just slightly more advanced than your current level of reasoning, they call these plus-level discussions, can actually help you think more morally maturely.
So surrounding yourself with people who challenge your thinking is a good thing.
For moral development, absolutely.
Yeah.
And having a variety of social experiences, especially during those teenage years, and as you transition into adulthood, that can also fuel this development.
Makes sense. But like Piaget's work, Kohlberg's also had its share of criticism, right? One of the main ones being that how you reason morally doesn't necessarily predict how you'll act. Like, you can talk the talk, but will you walk the walk?
Big time. Critics pointed out that you can have someone who can articulate super complex moral arguments, sound all sophisticated and ethical, but their behavior totally contradicts it.
We've all seen those people.
Right. Those who talk a big game about values but don't live by them. So just being able to reason morally doesn't guarantee you'll be a moral person. And Jonathan Haidt, he offered a really interesting perspective on this. He suggested that more often than not, our moral judgments start with a gut feeling, an intuition, and then we come up with the reasoning to justify that gut feeling after the fact.
So it's not always a purely rational process.
Not necessarily. Kohlberg's theory was all about the logic, the step-by-step reasoning. But Haidt's saying, hey, sometimes we feel first and think later. And another big critique of Kohlberg, his theory didn't really account for emotions. And emotions, they're like the fuel of our moral lives.
For sure. Like, how can you talk about morality without talking about empathy, guilt, anger? Those are huge driving forces.
You're absolutely right. Kohlberg, he was laser focused on that logical reasoning. But now we've got all this research showing that emotions like empathy, guilt, even anger, they play a huge role in how we judge what's right and wrong, and they motivate us to act.
Right. Emotions give us that push to actually do something.
Yeah, it's not just a head game. And then there's Carol Gilligan. She brought up this crucial point about potential gender bias in Kohlberg's theory. His focus was all about justice, those abstract principles, and she introduced this idea of a care perspective.
Right, considering how our actions impact our relationships with others.
Exactly. Gilligan argued that Kohlberg's theory was coming from a traditionally male perspective, prioritizing those abstract principles of justice and rights over the importance of relationships, caring for others, preserving connections. She proposed this care perspective, which puts empathy, communication, and meeting the needs of people in relationships at the center of moral decision-making. Now, while some early studies suggested that there might be gender differences in which perspective people tend to use, more recent research, it's showing that both males and females can use both.
So it's not about one being better than the other. It's about recognizing both perspectives.
Exactly. And we can't talk about Kohlberg without addressing cultural differences, because he's sort of implied that his stages were universal. But that seems like another area where things could get messy, right? Different cultures, different values.
Totally. Like, does everyone around the world think about morality the same way?
That's the million-dollar question. While there's research backing up those first two levels, pre-conventional and conventional, across different cultures, that top-level post-conventional reasoning, it hasn't been found everywhere.
Interesting.
Some researchers say that Kohlberg's scoring system, the way he measured moral development, it might not capture the nuances of how moral reasoning is expressed in certain cultures. Like maybe some cultures value different aspects of morality or express it differently, suggesting that how we think about right and wrong is more culturally shaped than Kohlberg originally thought.
So our cultural background plays a role.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating. Studies have found a link between having multicultural experiences, being open-minded, having a growth mindset, and demonstrating higher levels of moral judgment.
So exposure to different cultures can actually boost our moral development.
That's what the research suggests. And there's also been discussion about these recent trends, with some data pointing to a possible dip in post-conventional reasoning among college students. Yeah, like maybe there's more of a focus on personal interests now. It's like, sure, morality is important, but what about my career, my goals? And some people even go as far as to say that all this technological and economic progress, it hasn't necessarily led to moral progress, compared to some earlier societies that had a more sustainable, community-focused way of life.
It makes you think about what progress really means.
For sure. And one last thing about Kohlberg. He didn't really give families much credit when it came to moral development. He thought peers were way more influential.
Right, like parents don't matter as much.
That was his take. But most developmental psychologists today, they're like, hold up, parents, they have a huge impact on their kids' moral development, much more than Kohlberg acknowledged.
In what ways?
Well, how responsive parents are to their kids' needs, their communication styles, how they handle discipline, all of this shapes a child's understanding of right and wrong.
So while Kohlberg's work was groundbreaking, it's definitely just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
It's more complicated than he made it out to be.
For sure.
Right, let's shift gears a bit. We talked about how we think about morality. Now let's dive into moral behavior. How do our actions actually reflect our morals?
Okay, so when we're talking about moral behavior, we have to consider those basic learning processes, right? Reinforcement, punishment, and imitation.
The classic trio.
Yeah. If you're rewarded for following the rules, for being kind, you're more likely to do it again. Punishment for doing something wrong, it might make you think twice next time, though sometimes punishment can backfire. And then seeing others act morally, role models, that can also influence your behavior.
Monkey see, monkey do.
Sort of. But how effective these strategies are depends on a bunch of factors. How consistent they are, the timing, who's doing the rewarding or punishing, and how much the person learning actually understands the situation. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Makes sense. And it seems like our moral behavior isn't always consistent across different situations. Like we might act differently at home versus at school, or with friends versus with family.
Yeah, you're hitting on something really important. This classic study by Hartshorn and May, they looked at thousands of kids and their honesty in different settings.
Wow, thousands.
Yeah, huge study. And what they found was that kids' moral behavior was very context-specific.
So a kid who wouldn't dream of cheating on a test might lie to their parents about where they were going.
Exactly. It wasn't like there were just honest kids and dishonest kids. The situation mattered. Things like peer pressure, how likely they thought they were to get caught, those played a role.
So the environment can influence our choices.
For sure. But while the situation's important, Some people do seem to have a stronger tendency towards certain behaviors across different contexts. Like some individuals might be more prone to dishonesty overall. It's like a personality thing.
Okay, so both nature and nurture are at play here. What about the ability to resist temptation? Self-control, that seems like a big part of moral behavior.
It is. Walter Mischel, he did those famous marshmallow studies, the ones where kids had to choose between eating one marshmallow right away or waiting and getting two.
Oh yeah, I remember those.
Those studies showed that being able to delay gratification, being able to resist that immediate temptation, that's actually linked to a lot of positive outcomes later in life. It's a powerful skill.
Like being able to stick to your goals, make good decisions.
Exactly. And this ties into social cognitive theory, which basically says that our environment, our thoughts, and our behaviors, they all interact to shape who we are and how we act. Albert Bandura, he pointed out that there's a difference between moral competence, meaning you know what's right, and moral performance, meaning you actually do what's right. And he introduced this idea of self-regulation, where you monitor your own behavior, you compare it to your standards, and then you give yourself consequences. Like if you mess up, you might feel guilty or try to make amends. And then there's moral disengagement. This is how we justify doing bad things to ourselves.
Like rationalizing bad behavior.
Yeah. It's like, everyone else is doing it, or it's not that big a deal, or I had a good reason. We can twist things in our minds to make ourselves feel less guilty, and that can be a slippery slope.
For sure. Okay, let's move on to our third question. Moral feeling. How do emotions influence our moral compass?
So back in the day, psychoanalytic theory, particularly Freud's ideas, really emphasized guilt and wanting to avoid it as the foundation of morality.
Right, Freud, all about the subconscious.
Yeah, he proposed this concept of the superego, which is like our internal moral compass. It's got two parts: the ego ideal, which makes you feel proud when you live up to your parents' values, and the conscience, which makes you feel guilty when you don't. Freud believed the superego develops as kids identify with their same-sex parent, wanting to be like them and avoid losing their love.
Interesting. But modern views on conscience have evolved, right?
Totally. While Freud's ideas about the superego are hard to test directly, we now understand that our conscience develops through our close relationships, our growing understanding of ourselves and others, and our emotions. Guilt is now seen as a motivator for making things right. Even in little kids, when they feel guilty, they often try to repair the damage they've done.
So it's not just about avoiding punishment. It's about actually feeling bad and wanting to fix things.
Yeah, it's a deeper level of understanding. And feeling securely attached to your caregivers, that also seems to be linked to kids internalizing their values. It's like they trust their parents and want to be like them.
Makes sense. And then there's empathy, which is crucial for moral development.
Huge. Empathy involves both feeling what another person's feeling and being able to see things from their perspective. It develops gradually from infancy through adolescence. Little babies, they have a more general sense of distress when others are upset. But as they get older, they become better at understanding and responding to specific emotions. And empathy continues to grow during adolescence and is linked to things like being more socially skilled and more involved in your community.
So being able to empathize makes you a better person all around.
That's what the research suggests. And having positive relationships with parents and friends, that also fosters empathy. It's like practicing putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
It's like building that emotional intelligence muscle.
Exactly. And while earlier theories, like Freud's, really focused on those negative emotions, like guilt and shame, we now know that both positive emotions, like empathy, sympathy, admiration, and self-esteem, and negative emotions play a role in our moral lives. Sympathy, in particular, that feeling of concern for someone else's well-being, often motivates us to help them.
So it's not just about avoiding bad feelings. It's also about fostering good feelings that inspire us to act morally.
Exactly. And it's all interconnected. These moral emotions are intertwined with our cognitive and social development. Even something as simple as parents talking about feelings with their kids during playtime or while reading, that's been linked to kids being more helpful later on.
Really?
Yeah, it's about creating that emotional vocabulary and awareness early on.
Interesting. So we've covered thinking, feeling, and behaving morally. What about moral personality? Is there such a thing?
The big question. For a while, there was some debate about whether we could really talk about a consistent moral personality, mainly because of all that research showing how much our behavior can change depending on the situation. But lately, there's been a resurgence of interest in this idea, focusing on three key aspects: moral identity, moral character, and moral exemplars.
Okay, break those down for us.
Yeah.
Starting with moral identity.
Right. Moral identity is all about how central your moral beliefs are to who you see yourself as a person. Like, for someone with a strong moral identity, acting in a way that goes against their morals that would feel like betraying themselves. It's a deep part of who they are. These folks, they genuinely care about being good people, they reflect on their own moral standards, and they have a strong sense of responsibility to act ethically. And it's cool. Research suggests that as people mature, their reasons for wanting to be moral, they shift. When you're younger, it might be more about external things, like wanting approval from
Like
others.
wanting to look good, fit in.
Yeah, but as you get older, it becomes more about internal motivations, like living up to your own values, genuinely caring about others.
It becomes more authentic, less about appearances.
Exactly. And having a strong moral identity, it's been linked to better mental health and being less likely to rationalize bad behavior. But it's not always easy to develop this strong moral identity, especially for people who grow up in tough environments like disadvantaged neighborhoods. That's why things like community service programs can be so powerful.
Right? Giving people the chance to act on their values.
Yeah, to actually make a difference and see the impact.
Okay, so that's moral identity. What about moral character? How's that different?
Moral character, as described by researcher James Rest, it's about having strong moral convictions, the willpower to stick to your values, and the ability to persevere even when things get tough. To stand up for what you believe in, even when it's hard. It's about setting moral goals and being committed to achieving them. Moral motivation, in this sense, is all about prioritizing those values above other desires.
Mm-hmm.
And virtues like honesty, caring, dependability, those are all key components of moral character. And having good moral character, it provides a foundation for healthy relationships.
So it's like the backbone of being a good person.
Pretty much. And then we have moral exemplars. Those are the people who are like the embodiment of moral personality, identity, character. They've got it all. They live extraordinary moral lives. And by studying these folks, we can learn about what it means to be truly good. Research on young adults who are seen as moral exemplars, it's shown that they have a tendency towards more advanced moral reasoning, a stronger sense of moral identity, and closer relationships. Think about people like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, people who stand up for what they believe in, even when it's dangerous.
Exactly. These are individuals who have shown incredible moral commitment.
Powerful examples. Okay, last question on this topic. How do we figure out what's morally wrong versus what's just a social convention or a personal choice? That seems tricky.
It can be. And that's where social domain theory comes in. This theory suggests that as we grow up, we develop different types of knowledge and reasoning about different social situations. There's the moral domain, the social conventional domain, and the personal domain.
3 different sets of rules.
You got it. The moral domain, that's all about things that impact people's well-being, fairness, and rights. Moral rules, things like don't lie, don't cheat, don't hurt others, those are seen as obligations. Like you have to follow them. They're widely agreed upon. They're not just random rules someone made up. And breaking them, that's a serious offense, often tied to justice.
Right, it's about doing the right thing even though no one's watching.
Now, the social conventional domain, this deals with all those rules and customs we have to keep things running smoothly, like raising your hand in class, walking on the right side of the hallway.
So more like etiquette.
Kinda, yeah. These rules, they're more arbitrary. They can be changed if people agree to change them. And breaking them might get you in trouble, but it's not usually seen as a huge moral transgression.
Like if you wear a hat inside, it's not the end of the world.
Right. And this perspective actually challenges Kohlberg's idea that understanding social conventions is a lower level of moral thinking. It's saying, hey, there's a reason we have these rules. They serve a purpose. And then the personal domain, this is all about the things that are up to you as an individual. Your body, your privacy, your choice of friends. These aren't governed by moral rules or social norms.
It's about having autonomy, making your own choices.
Right. Understanding these different domains helps us see that our social judgments, they're complex. It's not always black and white.
For sure. So we've explored individual moral reasoning, all those theories and stages, but let's zoom out a bit. What about the bigger context? What are the influences that shape our moral development?
Totally. And we have to start with parenting. Research has shown that parents, they actually play a much bigger role than those early theories Piaget and Kohlberg initially gave them credit for.
Right, it's not just about peers.
Definitely not. Ross Thompson, he sees children as moral apprentices. They need guidance from the adults in their lives. He emphasizes 3 key aspects of the parent-child relationship that are super important for moral development. First, the quality of their bond.
So a loving, supportive relationship is key.
Huge. Secure attachment, where kids feel safe and loved, that's linked to them developing a conscience earlier and having better social development overall. It's that foundation of trust and care that makes a difference.
So it's not just about teaching kids right and wrong. It's about creating that emotional connection.
Exactly. The second aspect is proactive strategies. This is all about preventing bad behavior before it even happens.
Like being one step ahead.
Yeah, for little kids, this might mean distracting them from something they shouldn't be doing, redirecting their attention. For older kids and teenagers, it's more about having those open conversations about values.
Talking it through.
Yeah, helping them anticipate those situations where they might be tempted to do something wrong so they can resist even when you're not around.
Giving them the tools to make good choices on their own.
Exactly. And the third aspect is having conversations about morality. And this isn't just lecturing, it's a dialogue. It's about engaging with your kids, asking questions, listening to their perspectives. It involves both planned conversations and the spontaneous ones that come up in everyday life. And it includes talking about emotions.
Right, because emotions are tied to our moral choices.
Absolutely. Research has shown that parents who talk more with their toddlers about feelings during play, while reading, those kids tend to be more helpful in sharing later on. And when moms respond supportively to their kids' emotions, that's also linked to more pro-social behavior.
So even just acknowledging and validating your kids' feelings can make a difference.
Big time. Based on all this research, Nancy Eisenberg, along with other experts, recommend that parents be warm and supportive, use reasoning when explaining rules instead of just resorting to punishment, help kids see things from others' perspectives, involve them in making moral decisions, model moral behavior themselves, clearly explain expectations, encourage an internal sense of morality, and help kids regulate those big emotions.
It's like a holistic approach to raising a good person.
Exactly. And authoritative parenting, where you've got warmth and high expectations, but you're also responsive and supportive, that's been consistently linked to kids being more pro-social.
So it's about finding that balance between being firm and being loving.
Exactly.
All right, we've talked about parents. What about schools? They're another big influence on our moral development.
Yeah, schools play a crucial role, often through what's called the hidden curriculum. This refers to all those unspoken lessons kids learn about morality, just from the school's atmosphere, the rules, how teachers and administrators behave. Like, if a school heavily emphasizes obedience and punishes any dissent, well, that's sending a message about what's valued, even if it's not explicitly stated.
So it's about the culture of the school.
Exactly. And teachers, they're role models. The way they interact with students, how they handle conflict, that all matters. Darcia Narvaez, she talks about the importance of creating sustaining climates in schools. These are environments that focus on nurturing students' sense of purpose, their social engagement, their connection to the community, and their ethical understanding.
It's about creating a space where kids feel supported and empowered to be good people.
That's the idea.
Now, we often hear about character education in schools. What exactly is that?
Character education aims to directly teach kids about virtues, good character traits like honesty, responsibility, compassion. Traditional programs, they often have a clear set of moral rules, like a code of conduct, and consequences for breaking those rules. But more modern approaches, they also focus on building empathy, that sense of caring for others, and helping kids find purpose in their lives. It's not just about following rules, it's about understanding why those rules matter.
Right, having that internal compass.
Yeah. Lawrence Walker, he argues that good character education, it goes beyond just learning about virtues. It involves discussing them critically, thinking about how to apply them in your own life, learning from people who have shown moral courage, those moral exemplars we talked about, and getting involved in community service, actually putting those values into action.
So it's about making it real, not just theoretical.
Exactly.
What about values clarification? That seems like a different approach.
It is. Values clarification focuses on helping kids figure out their own values, what matters most to them. It's less about telling them what to believe and more about guiding them through a process of self-discovery. It's been a bit controversial, though.
Why is that?
Well, some people argue that it's too relativistic, that it doesn't provide enough moral guidance, that it could even conflict with the values of the community. Like, what if a kid decides that cheating is okay?
Right, that could be a problem.
But proponents of values clarification, they say it's about encouraging kids to think critically and make their own choices, not about endorsing any particular set of values.
So it's more about the process than the outcome.
Yeah.
Now, service learning, that's another way schools can promote moral development, right?
Mhm.
getting kids involved in their communities.
For sure, service learning is a powerful way to foster social responsibility. When kids actually volunteer, they get to see firsthand the needs in their community, they develop empathy, they understand social issues more deeply, and often they become more motivated to make a difference. And it's been linked to academic benefits like higher grades and increased self-esteem.
So it's a win-win.
Yeah, it helps the community and the kids themselves.
Cheating in school, that's a big concern for a lot of educators and parents.
hmm
What do we know about why kids cheat and what could be done about it?
Cheating, yeah, it's a big issue, and it takes different forms. Plagiarism, using cheat sheets, getting answers from friends. Sadly, research shows that it's pretty common, especially in high school and college.
What are some of the reasons kids give for cheating?
Well, they often talk about pressure to get good grades, not having enough time, feeling like the teaching isn't engaging or relevant, or just not being interested in the subject.
So it's not always malicious. Sometimes it's about feeling overwhelmed or disengaged.
Right. And the situation matters too. If there's a perception that everyone's cheating and that there's not much chance of getting caught, well, it makes it more tempting.
It becomes the norm.
Yeah. And personality plays a role too. Some people are just more prone to dishonesty. Maybe they're not as conscientious or agreeable. But there are things we can do to prevent cheating.
Like what?
Well, first, we have to make sure kids understand what cheating is and what the consequences are. It's not just about punishment. It's about understanding the ethical implications.
Right. It's about integrity.
Exactly. Increased supervision during tests can help, although it's not foolproof. Emphasizing academic integrity as a core value, making it part of the school culture, that can make a difference. And some schools use honor codes where students pledge not to cheat and agree to hold each other accountable.
It creates a sense of shared responsibility.
Yeah, it's about creating